together with Heather, we help facilitate Will. Just a little bit of housekeeping. The session will be recorded, and bathrooms are outside by the elevator, left for the women, right for men. We do have a October will and a November will, so if you want to check out the chamber calendar, you can take a look at that. I want to thank our 2024 sponsors. So Compton is our lead sponsor, Ailey, Cardinal Cushing Centers, Friendship Home, George Washington Toma, Enbridge, Marine Max Boston, Gibbs Software Solutions, Leone Marketing Solutions, PR First, and Tiny & Sons Auto Glass. So I'm going to introduce Marybeth, and then Marybeth will introduce Kadesh, and we'll start. Marybeth is the Chief Human Resources Officer at Aspire Alliance. She has been in human resources for over 30 years, with experience across healthcare and nonprofit sectors. For the past decade, she has served as the Chief Human Resource Officer at Aspire, where she oversees human resources strategies in employment relations, talent acquisition, compensation, and regulatory compliance. Her leadership is key to fostering a positive workplace culture, enhancing employee engagement, and driving organizational growth. Previously, Marybeth held senior HR roles at Cardinal Cushing Centers, the American Red Cross, and Good Samaritan Medical Center, where she successfully led regional HR initiatives and streamlined operations. In addition to her role at Aspire, Marybeth is an active member of the South Shore Chamber's Human Resources Group, Advisory Team, and the Associate Behavioral Health Human Resources Committee. Marybeth has a Bachelor's of Science degree in Education from the University of Massachusetts, Boston. So, welcome.
Thank you. Well, thank you, everyone, and welcome. I want to introduce our esteemed guest today, so I'm going to read because I don't want to miss anything because she is just an incredible human being. So I want to introduce Kadesh Sims Conroy. She's the Managing Director for Wellspring Group. Immigrating from Kingston, Jamaica to Boston in the 1980s, Kadesh grew up in the Roxbury neighborhood of Boston and graduated from Boston Latin Academy. The first in her family to achieve post-secondary degree, Kadesh earned a bachelor's and an MBA in Human Resources Management and Information Systems from Northeastern University. Kadesh currently serves as the Chief People and Culture Officer at Jewish Vocational Services of Boston and was recently awarded the 2023 Award of Distinction from New England's HR Leadership Forum. Congratulations. In 2013, Kadesh co-founded the Wellspring Group with her husband, Chris. Wellspring excels in providing HR solutions for company culture and employee retention. The Wellspring Group is also the Chamber's 2023 underwriter for both our Human Resources Group and our Not-for-Profit Group. Kadesh continues to design corporate training for emerging leaders in not-for-profit, the arts, healthcare, and human services. She has served the Boston Chamber of Commerce, Lindy Family Foundation, Greater Boston Nurses Association, and TSNE Mission Work. Kadesh lives in the town of Holbrook with Chris and their 4 children and is a published author of motivational work. Welcome. So, I'd like to get this conversation started. So, what I'd like to ask you is if you could provide for us some additional background information about your career journey, where you started and ultimately where you are today.
Thank you. Thank you for that introduction, Marybeth. And I just have to say thank you so much to Jill, to Heather, to the entire Chamber, and to this forum, Women in Local Leadership, and anything that is supporting women in leadership before I even go forward. One of the things that I like to do in addition to saying that is just really expressing gratitude. And I think that that is one of the most important things that we can do in behavior and important things that we can do for each other. So before I talk about myself, what I love to do, for those of us in this room that know each other or may not know each other or are familiar, I just like to take maybe 30 seconds, and I'm going to ask you to do a quick activity. And I just want you to out loud say thank you. So you're going to look at the person. If you know them, you're just going to say thank you. If you don't know them, just look at someone else and just say thank you for whatever it is. We're going to just spend 30 seconds of audibly saying thank you. Thank you. Awesome. Well, thank you again, everyone. Lots of stuff around what that does for us, particularly as women and particularly as leaders. So I like to talk about my career journey as almost like this piece to a puzzle that falls into perfect place every time. Every time I have a conversation with someone, every time I meet someone, there's always this serendipitous nature of how our relationships develop over time. And so about a year ago, I was on a plane back to a small island with Chris and my husband, and on the plane we were like finishing applications, because right when you get into, before you see Jamaica, there's like this 1 hour gap where you have no internet. Okay, so we're flying home to see my parents and to take care of my mother, who at the time was not well. And in the midst of flying over, there we are finishing applications, getting ready for finishing applications, doing recommendations for our youngest son, Josh, who is now at BC High. Woohoo, he's an Eagle, go Eagles football. All right. I'm a football mom now, so Lord help me. And, you know, in the process of that, balancing all of that. So I'm from a small island, a very small island, but it's one of the most popular islands because it's one of the most popular people in the world come from there, Bob Marley. So if I say Bob Marley in any room, people will start to sing some rendition of a Bob Marley song. My favorite rendition of the song is Three Little Birds, and it really just sings that every little thing is going to be all right. And that is kind of the nature of my career journey, is that every step that I've taken, everything will be all right. As Marybeth said, I went to Boston Latin Academy, and I'm brushing up on my Latin as we talk a little bit later about what it means for women to have their all, and the definition of all. What does that mean from the Latin version of it? And I went to Northeastern University, undergrad and graduate degree and master's in business. And, you know, my career has spanned all across the globe. So from Boston to Shanghai to Beijing to the Czech Republic, I have just had a knack for human behavior and what makes human beings really dwell together and live together in society really well, which is why I'm in human resources. I love the idea that we will not remove the human from the resources, and I think that that's really the basic complexities of what makes us really good at what we do. So that's a little bit about my career journey. I cannot, talk about my career journey without talking about my family. So I have 4 children, and the way I remember how old they are is I just go backwards, 23, 21, 19, and 16. So I have a graduate from Suffolk University, 2 young women that are both at Massachusetts College of Art and UMass Dartmouth, and Josh, who, again, football Eagles, go Eagles, is at BC High. So we have a wonderful blended family who I love very much, and without them, I would not be here. So I cannot talk about my career journey without talking about the definition of family and what that means to me.
Thank you. And you mentioned it, we hear a lot about successful women having it all and being able to balance personal and professional lives. But there's a lot of social pressures for women in particular when we hear women can do it all and have it all. What are your thoughts and opinions about those types of statements and the social pressures that women are under when it comes to balancing personal life, professional life, and their own well-being?
Yes. So I actually looked up the Latin origin of the word all after we started to talk about what it means to have it all, because when we had our discussion, I said, all could look very different to you, Marybeth, than it does for me. Mm-hmm. All could look very different to Michelle than it does for me, to Jill than it does for me. So when we start to define all for us as a group of people and gender classification, you really have to start to think about the complexity of the human nature of all. And the Latin means everything. The original is like omnibus, right? So it means all of something, everything. And I started to say, wow, that means that if I want to have it all, I have to have all of everything. All of everything in my career, all of everything with my family, all of everything with my parents, all of everything with my friends, all of everything with my education, all of everything. So it really made me start to think back to what all really means to me. And when we ask the question, can you have it all as a woman? There's so many social pressures about defining all, right? And I want to go back to just, history. Women were not able to vote until roughly 1920s. We were not able to open our own bank accounts till maybe 1970s. There's so many things that were barriers to our all, that when we think about the definition of all, there's also the construct of the social pressures and barriers that come with what does all mean right now in 2024. So I started to think about how I like to define all. And Marybeth, when you asked, you said balance between career, personal, and well-being. They should not be separate. All is everything, meaning the whole person being. And the definition of being as well is I am something. And so when I think about what it means for women to have it all, social pressures, I really want to go back to the fundamental principles of values. When I think about what it means to have it all, I think of my fundamental values: value of mercy, value of generosity, value of love, value of family. Because if I can have it all in those areas, then I can be a whole person, and I can have it all in those areas. And then in having it all in those areas, then I can exemplify those values. When I think about having it all with being a woman, is that you really have to center yourself first. You have to understand your values. You have to understand your identity. You have to understand the things that make you you, or else you will face the social pressures, the barriers, the ceilings, the invisible barriers, the ones we know, the ones we don't know, the conversations that are said, the ones that are not said, the psychology of, human behavior and gender dynamics and socialization that has happened in history for hundreds and hundreds of years. So when we talk about women having it all, we are pushing against social constructs that have been in place for hundreds of years. And so when we try to do it all, instead of being it all, we find ourselves burnt out. We find ourselves pushing against barriers that maybe are not even barriers that we need to push against. And so it's a really hard definition to say, what does it mean to have it all? What does it mean to battle against these social constructs? Because we are dealing with hundreds and years of build up. And what we're doing right now is we're tearing some things down. There's a quote that I love to quote, and it's by a Holocaust survivor, Viktor Frankl. And the quote says, between stimulus and response, there is a space. And in between that space lies the power and freedom to have our response. I like to define that space when we talk about women having it all as you filling that space with your own response, whatever all means for you. If it means you want to go back and get your master's and your PhD, that is your all. If it means that you want to start a family, that is your all. If it means you don't want a family, that is your all. If it means that you want to have your pets and walk them, that is your all. If it means that you want to be in a room with other women leaders, that is your all. So your all is that space in between. And quite honestly, what is challenging when we think about the social construct and the barriers is that society, people, all people, not just men, women, all of us, we start to fill it. Other people are filling our spaces with what the definition of all is. I'd like to challenge us to start to think about our definition of all and filling that space with our own response, because that's when we start to see what it means to have it all, because all, again, can look very different for you than it does for me.
So knowing and understanding what should be or what you would like to have in that space, how would you define success from a professional versus personal, or the combination thereof?
Again, I think when I do leadership sessions, they might ask a question like, what is a leader? What does success look like? I had a conversation with a woman I was mentoring about 2.5 years ago, and she was an up-and-coming HR professional. This is what I want to do. She's rising star. And one of our last conversations, she said, I'm actually going to move to Spain. And I'm going to move to Spain, and I'm going to be a yoga instructor, right? And I said, wow, that is like really, that's different than what we've talked about for like 5 years. But okay. Okay, well, if that's what that means. But in that moment, that's what success felt like and looked like for her. I want to tell you, rising star in human resources. But when she moved to Spain, started the yoga instruction, the business took off exponentially, right? And so part of that is really following the desires of your heart. Success, again, it can be defined in so many ways. Like, for example, I think I was extremely successful last week because, I got through the week, all the kids are safe. Okay? Josh had a football game. He was up against CM. I was so nervous. They were pretty competitive teams with each other. And then he came home. I said, you okay? He said, no, I'm fine. So again, success for each of us looks very different. In career, I think career success as well is very different for each of us. Some people have different value systems and ways that you like to be rewarded. For some people, the salary is the best thing. I will take an exponential salary and you can give me whatever title you want. For some folks, they're like, the title matters. I want to be the chief woman in charge, okay? Or if it's, educational access. There are some people that are consummate learners that want to go for their master's and their PhD and then another PhD. So again, success could mean a variety of things in our career. And one thing I like to encourage leaders to do is to ask yourself the question, like, what is needed here now? Like, what do I need right now here? The past is gone. The future is not here. But the present is what you have to focus on. So as a woman leader, what do I need here right now? And I know that this is kind of counterculture to the 5-year plan, the 25-year plan, the 36-year plan. But sometimes just answering the plan for today really helps to define what success looks like, because I think I was successful yesterday. I think I'm successful this morning. And then, tomorrow, success can look very different. So success in career can look very different for every one of us, just how we define it.
So you talked a lot about social pressures about 2 or 3 minutes ago.
Mm-hmm.
When we think about social pressures and we think about the challenges that women have faced in leadership roles, some call it roadblocks. What were some of the biggest challenges or roadblocks you personally faced? And in your role, you see a lot outside of in working with other organizations and other women in leadership roles. What have you seen in terms of for yourself roadblocks or challenges, and for other women who are in leadership roles?
So I'm going to start with the first part, what I've seen for myself as challenges in leadership. I think coming from another country was a privilege, right? It was a privilege because I got to witness and explore multiple cultures when I was in my forming and norming years, so before my preteens. And there are particular values that are very innate in Jamaica or in the culture of Ireland. Number one, education. So you got to get an education. Education is key. It's the number one thing. It's the thing that you hold forever. That can't be. I could tell you every education quote from my father possible. Okay, I'm like, I should just quote you, Dad, for everything that he said about education. And so that is, the nature of the culture that I was raised in. Interestingly enough, as well, when you go into a classroom, like in Jamaica, like a preschool, And all the way up until, I think let's say 9th grade here, when the teacher comes in, you have to say, "Good morning, teacher." Like, there was just a level of respect for education, a level of respect for the profession. So everyone, "Good morning, teacher." And having that cultural perspective also in Jamaica, when you go to Jamaica, and I'm going to use just identity markers here, you can see that I physically look like a black woman. But when you go to Jamaica, you'll see other Jamaicans that look like Marybeth or have other physical characteristics from across the globe. And that's because Jamaica, again, is a melting pot of multiple global countries that have, migrated there, and people ended up in Jamaica for various reasons. Slavery being one. So in Jamaica, there's really no differentiation between their societal differentiation, so social economic differentiations, but in terms of the physical differentiations or the markers, those are not necessarily differentiations. And so coming here, my parents, when I got here, my father, I couldn't go outside, number one. The only place I could go was the library, okay? So my parents were like, you go to the library and you come home. You go to the library and you come home. And when I got here, the exam school, so you have to test to get into the exam school. When I got here, I tested and I got into both Latin Academy and Latin school. And I said to my parents, I'm like, look, I've had 6 months where I just got to know people. I really would like to just stay at this school. And my parents are like, okay, sure. And I'm like, yeah, I'll pass the test again. Now, I want to share with you the level. I mean, the tests are very difficult exams. But in my mind, I was so sure that if I prepared and I go in, that I will pass and I will succeed and I will be number one and I'm more than worthy and this seat belongs to me and I've earned it. So these are the things that have framed my mind. I've earned it. If I prepare, if I work hard, if I do these things, I can achieve these things. So a little bit of my nature too, and my kids will tell you this, I think almost anything is possible. It's really hard for me, just because of how I was raised, to think something is impossible. For example, last weekend, we moved this IKEA. Anyone ever done any IKEA closet?
Yeah.
Okay? We moved this IKEA closet from the upstairs to the downstairs. There was like half an inch of room to get the closet through the narrow stairs. Let's just say we got it done. Both Josh and Adani, they were like, Mom, this is impossible. I'm like, what are you talking about? There's a half of an inch. Don't you see that half of an inch? And so that is a framework in which I approach leadership, and that is how I see it. Now let's talk about what happens as you move up the ladder, or as you move into other areas of leadership. So in high school, it's dependent on me. That's what I thought. I ended up taking the test and getting into the school and then chose. Okay, great. Same thing with college. I get to Northeastern, and at the time, I get to Northeastern, and you get into the big auditorium, and they're like, look to the left and look to the right. One of these people will not be here. I'm like, no, everybody's going to be here. I don't know what you're talking about. Okay, you're going to be here and you're going to be here. I'm going to be here too, so don't be looking over here to the left or to the right. Okay. And I get there, and it is visibly different. Visibly different. So I'm sitting in a room, I think it was like 150 undergrads at the time, and I was the only person of color in that room. And interestingly enough, I grew up on Tremont Street, which is about 4 blocks from Northeastern. So I would walk through, right? I would walk through back then the neighborhood as it was. So the neighborhood as it was at the time, projects, not what you see now, not the condominiums, to Northeastern, which is like another side of the world. So then you start to see the variations and the differences. And because I lived a very sheltered life as a teenager because of my parents, I also wasn't socialized to what it meant to be a woman of color, presenting as a woman of color. So it wasn't until I had an African American studies class now in my freshman year that I started to realize, holy crap, there is so much that is going on in society and culture. And then you start to then take a lens back and awareness. You're like, oh, wow. It's like, how do you know that something is different, or how do you know that there's something else going on here? It's about your awareness and your opening to that particular awareness. Fast forward into my undergraduate degree. It was about 2 years before I recognized that there was an African American Institute, because I went to a Caribbean festival of something at Northeastern, and I saw all of these people of color. I'm like, where are these people? I'm like, where are these people? Where are they? And immediately, also, they, most of the students at that time that came into Northeastern that were people of color would come in through a program called the Ujima Scholars. Now, I didn't come through that program, which meant that I was not socially acclimated to that program. And then started hanging out, and then started to realize, wow, there's some differences. But then you get to your MBA. Okay. So I wanted to talk about, a project I had. And this, I love to reference this because one of my really great friends, who's a social entrepreneur, Tiffany, I met while I was getting my MBA, and we had this project that we had to do for finance. And it was her and I and, two other men. And we would walk away from the conversations like, let's just do this by ourselves. Not to say anything about men and their intelligence. The men are wonderful and they're super intelligent. But in that moment, we would be in these groups where, these two individuals were just, they had this level of confidence and, but they weren't working as hard. Okay, they weren't putting as much. I knew that by definition of work. They were not giving as much. And so there was a moment where I was like, oh, I think I may have to work a little bit harder. But why do I have to work harder? Why wasn't there an equal plane in which we both felt like, oh, we could work up to this standard and then that's it? So, some of the barriers for myself about having to work twice as hard, having to define or redefine our areas of expertise and skill set. Then let's get a little bit further. You get into certain rooms, like maybe you're in a boardroom or whatever room with other leaders. And there is a lot of social studies that talk about women raising their hands or being called on last or feeling like you have a voice. Well, if you've been societally indoctrinated to not having a voice, and then by the time you get to a particular level in your career and you start to speak, and then it's like, wait a minute, I don't know if you ever had this happen to you, but you'll say something, and then someone else will repeat what you said, and it's like, that's what I just said. Hold on, I just said that. And so you start to notice behavioral tendencies and characteristics that are, and I don't want to make it all monolith because it's not everyone, but you do start to experience it. Like, did you just hear me? Often having to say, I'm here. 1, I'm worthy. 2, my opinion matters. 3, my voice matters. 4, and no, I do not have to tell you about my resume to validate what I've just said. 5, no, I don't have to tell you about my background to validate or substantiate what I just said. 6. And so there's an affirming and a boldness that comes from, I think, the opportunity when there are these barriers, particularly for women. So those are some of the barriers I face. But I think because of my upbringing and because, it took me a while to see what it was that the challenges were, that now my eyes are wide open. And I want to reference something that happened recently as well. I just won an award at Northeastern for the Women Who Empowers Leadership, which is a huge deal. So I want to just say thank you to Northeastern for that. And when I got into the room with other women leaders, it was like a group of women leaders, and they were all just cheering each other on. Great job, you can do this, this is amazing, what your venture is exceptional, you're so smart, you're so talented, I just don't know how many spaces that women come into rooms or spaces where they're like, Marybeth, you're amazing. Jill, you're so talented. Shan, you're great. You're exceptional. You're incredible. That we validate each other, and sometimes we invalidate each other, even in our own silent behaviors and silent actions. So again, there are just so many things that we come up against. Women, and I can just give you so many data points, like women in venture capitalist dollars, less than 9%. Women-founded organizations are one of the most highest climbing. So women-led organizations, entrepreneurship, highest climbing, lowest funded, lowest supported. I mean, you could just talk about the societal pressures that come that make you look at yourself in the mirror sometimes and go, well, maybe no, I can't do it. But we need to be mirrors to each other, right? We need more spaces like this where we're mirrors to one another to say, yes, you're worthy of it, you're valuable. Every hour you spent in your career, every hour you have not spent, every hour you spent walking your dog, sleeping, resting, taking care of yourself, breathing, it's all worth it. And we shouldn't have to compete for wellness. We shouldn't have to compete for being whole. And I feel like that's what societal pressures does, and those are the barriers that women face. It's like we're competing against being well. And I just find that very complicated and not a great state of existence. And we get burnt out. And we get angry. Boys on the playground, they tell them, play harder, play rougher. That's looked at as bold, and that looks like camaraderie. Girls on the playground or in the boardroom or in the conference room, it's looked at as aggressive, angry. So there's a lot of social norms that we have to kind of move against.
In light of these social norms, it's evident you've had influencers that have helped shape who you are as a leader. What are some of those individuals that you can recall that really played an important role in influencing you?
It's so tough to answer that question. When I was thinking about this question, I had a hard time coming up with like 8 influencer or people that influence, because I find that influences every single day, and I'm influenced all the time. I've had some really wonderful mentors in my life, and my mentors I've had since I was a teenager, and they've stayed with me. So one of my mentors is the director of Balfour Academy at Northeastern University, and he is just a very wonderful man, gives his life to young people to ensure that they develop and do what they need to do. I've had mentors and sponsors and allies in my professional career. I cannot name them all. It would be like an injustice, but you all know who you are, so I want to say thank you to them. But I really believe, again, I want to go back to the space in between and how I like to fill my space and what really influences me. I'm drawn to people and character, because what I want to be remembered for is my character. That's what I want my reputation to be, that I'm a person of good character, that you met me and you felt a genuine, sincere empathy, kindness, generosity, mercy, all of those things. So when I think of anyone that's been an influencer, it's those people of good character. Sometimes I sit with people and it's like they might not be the most famous name, they may not be on the podcast, or you may never know of them, but they're the ones that give, right? They're the ones that give silently of their time, of their talent, of their treasure. They're the ones that smile or say thank you. They're the ones that will call you and ask you, hey, how are you doing? And not really want anything from you. So when I think about an influencer, I think about the value of character, and that happens every day. It's the person that let me go yesterday when I was in the line at the store, and they're like, oh no, go before me. And I'm like, you sure? They're like, yeah, sure. I remember those faces. It's the people that smiled. After the pandemic, there's a lot of social studies that talked about what a smile does for everyone, and because we had masks on, people were missing the smile, so every time someone smiled, I'm like, wow, this is great. They influence me, they influence my day, and I like to just think of influencers as just great leaders, great people, people of great character and great reputation, people that when you walk away from a conversation with them, you feel like, you know, maybe they didn't say much, but they listened, they were an active listener, maybe they didn't do much, whatever it was, but you walked away feeling a little bit more whole. And so that's how I look at folks that are influencers for me. So I could just name it, you know, there are hundreds and thousands of people that have influenced me. And that's how I also pick my media too. Like, you know, not that I'm a toxic optimist. This is a term that came up, but it is important that we have people that, again, remind us just how worthy we are, how valuable we are, how meaningful we are, and just how incredible it is that we have this one life and an opportunity. Like, you could have been anyone, anywhere. You know, we're one of a billion, and you're so unique, and so I really do find my influence from character. You can influence me more by what you do, and I can see that in your character.
I'm going to go on with the question. So, in looking at where you are today, what are some of the missteps that you've seen women take while entering into management and then obviously up the career ladder to a strong leadership role? What are some of the missteps, things that people need to be aware of and not fall into?
I like to think of every misstep, because I've had several, as an opportunity to learn and to grow. I tell folks that I coach when they're like having a hard time with a direct report, and they're like, you know, I have to go in and do it for them. I'm like, let them fail. Okay, let it fail. Let the ball drop. Walk away from it. Go have a good weekend, right? And when we were talking about barriers earlier, and this may not be popular to say, but I am going to say this is that sometimes we are our own barrier for a number of reasons. And then again, it's psychological in nature. We have been, conditioned to think that we should be here and not here. The spaces that we're heading into as women in leadership, they weren't built for us. They weren't designed for us, right? You look at, again, we have 46 presidents. It wasn't designed for us, that office. If you look at, banking system, multiple places weren't designed for women to lead in mind. And so we're moving against, again, a structure that wasn't designed for us, and then asked to navigate that structure without a lot of support. So one thing that I think can be a misstep with women, both in one, self-perception. Do I belong here? Am I worthy? When you're asking yourself those questions then become conversations that you're having. Whether you think you're not having them, you actually are. So you walk into a conversation, and the am I worthy is in that conversation. And then you may display an am I worthy response, right? You may display a response that is, in response to the environment that you're in. Like, I'm constantly having to push against this. I have to say this. I can't. So sometimes people are experiencing your thoughts of I constantly have. And then that leads to different behaviors. So one is sometimes we can be an enemy of ourselves because of the conditioning that we're always fighting, always pushing, always having to, this kind of always statement. So I think that comes with some missteps, because then we treat everyone, sometimes we treat people in that way. In particular when we're really busy also. Because if you're busy, you're spending less time being mindful about how you're responding and how you're engaging with others. So this is going back to the balance, having it all. I can't be a parent. I was an algebra teacher, I was a biology teacher, I was a chemistry teacher during the pandemic. I had 4 kids in different grades. I said, oh my gosh, I was learning everything all over again. It's okay. I got my geometry back. I was okay with the calculus. But again, and then at the same time, running a business, and then being a wife, and then trying to be a good friend. Yeah, I'm going to make missteps, right? Also, the thing about missteps is women, we have to give ourselves grace. We have to forgive ourselves. Sometimes we are so unforgiving of ourselves and each other that we can't even come back from a misstep. Like, I'm sorry I did this, and someone really go, okay, it's okay, I get it, I accept your apology, assuming good intention. So I think some of those are a little bit of like the personal missteps. Missteps around mentorship, allyship, and sponsorship. We cannot get there alone. This concept that isolation or individualism, me, myself, and I live my life, yay, okay, that is not, because again, we are more powerful as a collective community. And if we could do it together, if we can see each other as allies, as sponsors, as mentors, there's so much more we can do for one another. And I think that in my career, and if I could give any advice, is really do reach out. Really do. Not just like come to the sessions. These are exceptional sessions. But what happens after? Like, where do we go after with each other? Where do we say, hey, Marybeth, let's hang out. Let me learn more about you. Let me, have a little bit more inquiry. So I think that some of the missteps that we make as well is that we don't look at each other as mentors, allies, friends, sponsors. And sometimes it's really hard because we then isolate ourselves in our thoughts and in our profession. We think that there can only be one of us because, again, gender representation, when you look around, there's only one in the room. And so it's like we're competing for the seat against one another to be that one. But we don't have to compete. We are all gifted in different areas. And that seat, all of those seats can be filled by all of us. But we have to do that together. And so I think a misstep that I've noticed is that, as women, we don't tend to find each other in the mentorship, sponsorship, allyship space when we are our greatest advocates for each other. And for our career growth and success. So
we have a lot of representation here today at various levels of leadership, some of which work for other organizations or own their own organization. What are the 5 key takeaways based on today's conversation you want people in this room to leave with?
I want you to, 1, remember the space in between and fill that space with whatever you feel is necessary right here, right now, today. So fill it with whatever brings you joy, whatever brings you fulfillment, whatever it means to be everything, everywhere, all the time, even if that means that you're spending 8 hours by yourself and just reading, whatever that looks like. The second is I want us to remember access to opportunity and forums like this, the Chamber, Women in Leadership, and how we can as a collective community define access to opportunity for each other. Again, we can do more together than we can apart. The third is support systems. Remember, I'm your ally, I'm your sponsor, I am your friend, and I really do mean that. Remember to assume good intention and that you're worthy, most of all. I don't define your worth. No one in this room does. You do. And I think the last thing is balance. And I want to go back to what you said, professional, personal, and well-being. I'm not asking you to balance those. I'm asking you to balance what that means inside for you. So if professional is 10% and, personal is 90%, that's your balance. So define balance for yourself, because if we let others define balance for us, then forever our spaces will be filled with definitions of what other people think, how we should respond, where we should be, what we should say yes to, what we should say no to. And remember that it's very important that there is there's I, me, mine, but then there's us, we, ours together. I'd like us to think about the us, we, ours together, because that is where everything happens, in rooms like this, and then out in the world.
Is there anything that we haven't touched upon that you would like to share with the group before we open it up to questions?
No, I think I touched on everything. Great question.
So it's an opportunity for all of you to think about a question you would like to ask of Kadesh. She's here, she's available, she's captured, not going anywhere real soon. So please take advantage of asking her questions about herself and her experiences.
I'll go. Yeah. It's I guess a question for probably not just myself, but many other people in the room. If you're, you're the mom, you're the wife, you're the full-time worker, you're doing all the things, and then you talk about balance, and you're trying to do that thing because that's another thing you need to do with balance, right? Where do you see the best path for someone who has a hard time even finding, what do I do to balance? Like, do I read a book? Is walking around Target mindlessly for 3 hours my balance? Is, and then you come home, you're like, that was wrong. That wasn't what I needed to do for myself. Now I feel guilty. And that's kind of one of the things I think when you're talking about, all of your journeys and all your experiences. That's like my own personal biggest struggle, where I'm like, I don't have a thing. I do. I just clean and I cook and I take care of people and people at work and people at home, and I don't know, like what, I don't know, I guess there's no question there, just might have just started doing therapy.
A little therapeutic.
Okay, if this happens.
I find myself being lost at, like, what is that thing that I'm going to offset feeling like I'm doing something because I have to? And I'm trying to find the thing I want to do because it's for me, and I want to do this for myself, to balance.
What's your name?
Tammy.
Tammy, okay. Great to meet you, Tammy. When people ask me about because people often will say, how do you do that? How do you do this? And I really often say, I don't know. I really have no idea how it gets done, but it gets done. So for each of us, that balance looks very different, Tammy. I want to ask you 2 questions, and you don't have to answer it now.
Clearly, I'm an open book.
All right. If you were to, and this is an exercise that I do with, different individuals that I coach, if I were to ask you to strip yourself of the title mother, so I'm not a mother, strip yourself of the title, I'm not an HR professional or an owner, strip yourself of the title, I'm not a wife, strip yourself of the title, I'm not, right? So everything you just defined for me, I want you to take those titles off, okay? And then, when you've taken them off, because this is, again, something you should do in a quiet, safe space, ask yourself what's left, okay? It's okay. You want to ask yourself what's left, okay? So what's left here? And in those moments, asking yourself the hard question about what is left after everything else has filled my space. And again, you've chosen in different areas. Some areas you're like, I'm doing this because it wasn't something I want to do. You can start to find where you find love, joy, and happiness. If walking around Target for 3 hours is where you find space, because I have a daughter that loves to walk around Walmart. She's like, I just love Walmart. I'm like, all right, good for you, but I cannot. 2 minutes, okay? 2 minutes, that's all, right? But in there, she finds joy. That's her space. So first, we have to take off the layers, right? Take off the responsibilities. I had a conversation with my kids maybe like 8 years ago, I think, and they still quote me on this. I had them all in the living room, and I said, I want you to remember, my name is Kadesh. I am a person. I have friends. I have things I love. And so I had to create some boundaries for them. They're like, and you're going to think, Tammy, this is silly. They were shocked. They were like, oh my gosh, she is a person. She does have friends. It was like a moment where, and they quote my
I was just going to say, I can literally probably hear them being like, my name is Kadesh. I guess you were like, yeah, they're not nice.
Yeah, our oldest quoted me 2 weeks ago. He's like, yeah, Mom, I remember when you told me who you were. And I was like, yeah, okay, right? But part of it is I had to strip myself of the things that come with the titles. Because again, the social constructs will say that I am, you know, I'm supposed to cook. I'm supposed to do these different things. My best friend, she loves to cook. She loves to cook for her family. You know, I don't necessarily share that same affinity. However, when she is cooking for her family, she is in full, it's joyous. You could see she feels whole. And when they're eating, it's just like you could see. But that's because she stripped herself of something and then talked about the thing that made her feel good. And why does she love? Because she cooked for her grandmother. And her grandmother, you know. And then the second question is, I want you to think back to yourself as a child, of your earliest memories, okay? And just ask yourself the question, like, what was needed then, there? And then you often start to find the things that were important to you. And it's okay to get back to them. It's okay. You just have to take the time, one. And I encourage everyone to take the time. Please do your best, because the guilt that you are experiencing is a guilt that only you experience, right? And the shame or the guilt or all the things that come along with it is something that you're experiencing. So take the time, and I'll send you a good place that I think is a place that I have found to be a great place for you to take the time for yourself, and just to say no for a little bit to everything else, all the titles, all the structures, just a little yes to you. Because when you say yes to you, you become a better wife, you become a better mother, you become a better friend, you become a better professional, because you're whole. You're good.
I love that. Thank you.
You're welcome.
There was another question.
My question was about creating boundaries between your professional passion and family at home. I find now that I'm managing a team that I'm passionate about my business, I have someone working a shift that coincides with my dinner time, and I want to be present with my 2-year-old, but sometimes there's like a little fire I have to put out, and I feel very pulled in two directions. So I'm curious, as a leader, how do you create and then enforce those boundaries for your own life, for your family?
There are non-negotiables. There's some non-negotiables that you have to define for yourself as a leader. One, if dinner time is a non-negotiable for you, you have to make it a non-negotiable. You have to make that clear to those that report to you, to those that are in partnership with you, to those that you lead, that you have some non-negotiables. There was an article about a year ago about a calendar. I forgot what CEO it was, and you saw the calendar, and the calendar had like reading, talk to this person. There was no meetings. And it was just like these non-negotiables. And so non-negotiables, we fill our calendars with everything that is required. I love to fill my calendar with the non-negotiable. Right? So this time is a non-negotiable time, and that's the only way that you can communicate your boundaries with others, is that you have to set the boundaries, and you have to keep to the boundaries as well. So, and I know it's not necessarily easy, it's a practice that you have to do over time, because what you're doing is behavioral conditioning for those that work with you. So it's behavioral conditioning. Also, you also can't say yes, right? So there's a double-edged sword in that, okay, I may get a request at this particular time. Am I going to respond to that request? They need me. They don't need you. Okay? So there's also this non-negotiable that you have to do in yourself. The second piece of this is a little bit more practical, is delegation. Okay? I often, one of my first things that I do when I am developing a team is I develop a right and a left hand. Okay? When I'm not available in this non-negotiable time, right, this is your thing. Left, this is your thing. So leadership development in helping to create that balance is extremely important. Sometimes as leaders, we feel like, going back to the omni, the all, everything, everywhere, that we have to be the ones to do it. And that is the greatest collapse on women and structure, is that I'm the only one that can. Well, what happens if you decide that someone else could, right? And so you should practically, one, the boundaries for yourself, put your non-negotiables on your calendar, make that clear to everyone, and then delegate. If this, then. If this, then. And then you develop a lot more leadership autonomy in your leaders, and then you'll have people that you feel like, again, the community, because you can't do it alone. You can't lead alone. Right? You just can't. Even if you're the owner, the founder, you just can't do it alone. When you do it alone, it sinks into time, like time with your family and dinner. I want to share a story, okay? I had a colleague, and their son went to college, and they're in college. They're not calling you anymore. They don't want to, and we were talking about, what she gave up during his high school year. Like, I remember I stayed here late, and I did this late, and I did that late. I want to say, when I said about values and what I look for in influencers, is I remember the character of a person. That dinner time, you're not going to get back. Okay. You won't get that back. And those are the times that are the most important, because that develops character, that develops leadership, that develops boundaries for your team, that shows them values that are intrinsic and extrinsic that you can't even say. And it helps them set boundaries for themselves. It keeps you well, it keeps them well. A good balanced dinner, time with your family, joy. Right? It makes you a better leader. The fire, it will go out. Right? It will go out. Thank you.
I'm curious how old you were when you came from Jamaica, and what led that move here, and how that formed your leadership journey and probably continues to form.
So I was 11 when I came from Jamaica. So I was 11, I was turning 12 that summer, and my parents came to America. So this is a little bit customary in some of the islands. Like, your parents will come and you'll live with like a grandparent or an aunt. My parents came here, and they were here for about 7 years before I came. So my brothers were in Jamaica with my grandmother. And my grandmother raised my brother, Jonathan, and I. And I came here when I was 11, and I was going to be 12. So I remember, there's some distinctive memories I have. I remember being in the airport in Jamaica weeping. I was like, why do I have to leave here? And first of all, I didn't know where I was going, because I'd never been to America. I'm like, why do I have to leave this place? I just don't know what's going on. And because of the nature of the dynamics of my parents, I didn't see my mother for that entire time. So the first time I actually remember my mother was when I saw her in the airport when I was 11 years old coming here.
Yeah.
So, and there wasn't FaceTime, there wasn't WhatsApp, there was nothing, right? Everyone. So I'm like leaving my maternal figure, my grandmother. She took my brother and I. But I'm like, this place is beautiful, Jamaica, land we love. That's the national anthem. I'm like singing it. But I knew my parents said that they were bringing us here for this construct, and I can talk a lot about the American dream, this dream, which I still believe is possible. Okay, I'm a living testament of that dream. Okay? If you work hard, if you believe in yourself, if you have good character, that dream is very possible for anyone that comes to this wonderful country. And I remember my parents, my father and mother, like, you will have a better opportunity here. You'll have more access. You will have, you can work hard. You can have a better education. And that's what formed my leadership journey. It also made me unafraid. Okay? So people will often, my friends will say I'm fearless. Well, I've had to leave a lot of things behind. I've had to say goodbye to some things. I've had some trauma, some pain. And I think that those things are the things that expand us and develop us. Again, I can use that traumatic space and fill it with something negative, or I can use that traumatic space and fill it with opportunity and optimism. And so it definitely shaped my journey, 150%. It taught me independence because, again, I was without my mother for a long time, and there's a lot of social sides about that. I had my grandmother raise me. I was with my brothers. I took care of my brothers when I came here. There's some cultural differences, like there wasn't a lot of access to television. There was one channel. I read a lot. I was explorative. So the cultural changes and coming to this country really did shape my perspective of leadership and the ability to do absolutely anything. If you just conquer your fears, conquer the things that are inside of you that are saying, no, you can't. I had to become a champion of myself. I had to become a challenger of myself. I had to become a cheerer of myself. I had to become a supporter of myself in a culture that I was trying to assimilate to. So it was very different. But it is the thing that I think has really made my journey. So, and I think also that it doesn't matter if you've migrated from another place to another place. There's a lot of studies about learning a new thing, right? So learning a new thing, and there's health benefits to this. If you want to learn to play the piano right now, you can have the same experience mentally and psychologically as I did moving from one place to the other, right? If you want to do pickleball tomorrow, never done it, it gives you the same experience because your brain, when you start to learn a new thing, it starts to, turn on different neurons and different things in your brain that then leads you to having kind of different outcomes in how you lead. And so learn a new thing or do a new thing. Go to a new place. How I ended up in Beijing. I was like, where am I going to go? Oh, let's go to the furthest place away from here. You've never been, you don't know anyone. All right. And then that just, opens your eyes and your lens to the possibility of what you can be with this life that you have. So it definitely shaped my journey when I came here. It was so beautiful and culturally different too, because when I got here, when I tell my story in leadership settings, I often talk about being identified as a black girl and not actually knowing what that meant. I was a Jamaican girl. I was from Jamaica. And, growing up in Roxbury, most of my friends were Vietnamese. And, my peers, by affinity, something must be wrong with her, or not because, but again, I didn't understand the experience until I started to culturally experience it. So there were just so many layers to the growth in, being able to get to this place. But,
I think there was just one more question from someone on this side. I don't want to leave anyone out. No?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, the next one is October 17th. It's with Carly Pardini from Marybeth. She is the marketing coordinator for the Briar Group restaurant. And then November 7th with Angelica Gomez, right here. She's with us, and she's from NeighborWorks Housing Solutions. So,
Well, thank you all for coming, and thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm going to have to run here. So thank you so much. I flew around when I first started off my career. I'm a person of age, and my journey was so different. One that I was back on, I learned a lot from.
I'm definitely going to thank you the same when it's meeting.
Oh, yes.
I thought that was fantastic.
And sometimes not very nice, because it was a world.
Caroline Corbin. So my friend Rachel here, you were amazing. Yeah, so Rachel invited me here today. I've never been to Thank you very much. Thank you. But I was saying I wanted to thank her for taking me. Right? That was no, but my nephew happens to be Hasenfuss.
Really?
Yeah.
Your nephew, is that, he's a JV coach. Oh, that is so great.
Oh, Brendan Ryan is here? Oh my God, he's amazing. Yeah.
Where do you